Hello, welcome to the FilmDirt Lounge. Well, it's time to talk about Robocop, the 2014 film. It was a remake, a retelling of the original classic from 1987 with Joel Kinnaman as Alex Murphy. Now, literally just finished watching the film again tonight. This was the second time I've seen it ever. I thought it was a very average, bland film on the first viewing, and my opinion on the second viewing hasn't changed. I actually think it's a lot worse than how I remembered it originally. Doesn't seem to be much of a point in remaking this story. They haven't really strayed too far from the original source material. They've tried exploring further into maybe a character study or the ethics of using AI and remote judgments instantly there and then, because here he can kind of wirelessly tap into a database and arrest someone depending on what crimes are stored up there in the cloud, and also the ethics of whether or not it's a human or a robot judging you. In the original 80s film, this was kind of brushed over, of course. It was much more a simple time. There was a data recovery thing, of course, where he would interact with the police computer with his data spike and call up the information that way. And it being more simple, it was much more entertaining. Now, I get it. I get what they had to do with this more modern version. It just seemed like another way of being lectured to about ethics, about whether or not a man should be able to live beyond his natural lifespan, i.e. after death, what effect that has on the family. And the way it came across to me was that this story is almost hindered that it is a version of Robocop. If they left Robocop out of it and actually explored these ethics without this character, it might have been quite interesting. The fact that we've got a retelling of an original classic that is nowhere near as good as that film is just very restricting. So initially, within the first 10-15 minutes, you can see it's a much more serious story. Murphy is undercover, interacting with these villains, and eventually suffers the same tragedy of being killed, this time by a car bomb. And the way this part of the story panned out was just completely wrong in my book. The original film, it made you feel sorry for Alex. We held with Alex through being tortured by this cop-killing gang, and it held on that, and we suffered with Alex. We knew he had a family. His last few moments were sad and abhorrent, and we wanted him to come back and take revenge. Whereas in this film, I didn't really get who the actual villains are. I didn't really feel anything. And the car bomb was just a cop-out. It looked like he wasn't even that injured. It threw him back about 10 feet. It was much more serious than it originally looked. I don't even think he lost his life. I think that decision had to be made by his wife, played by Abbie Cornish. Brilliantly acted. Every cast member here is brilliant in their actual roles. I think the main issue here is this story. It's lackluster, and it lost focus on what we're supposed to care about. The original motivation as depicted here was the scenes in Tehran where you've got robots making decisions instantly whether people, hostiles are threats or not. And you've got the Ed 209 type robots. And the effects here were initially very good, and they turn into quite a ropey looking plasticky effect later on in the film as well. So the consistency isn't there. But in these Tehran scenes, I think it looks really good. And the voices as well, nice and deep and authoritative. I think that part is great. And we get that the robots sometimes make mistakes and it's not easy to make decisions. So you've got to have the human aspect. But we already explored this in the original 3 films. I think they explored this more, was it in Robocop 2, where you've got to have a good cop, and Kane wasn't a good cop, he was a drug addict. And that's where the almost comedy satire came into it. There are much more interesting films than this. And like I said earlier, Robocop didn't need to be in this. We could have told this story a different way and still get this message across. And they've tried to add an element here where they're trying to appease the public with keeping the hand. You know, it's a human looking hand. I assume it's human. I don't think it is really, is it? It can't be. It's just suspended at the end of a robot limb. He's holding the gun in that hand, and who's pulling the trigger? Is it man or machine? And when Murphy succumbed to his injury, he still remembers everything. His life before, who he is. In the original film, they blanked everything. And that was the actual story about man overcoming the machine. He was gaining memories over time. He would get triggered and put the pieces together. And at this point in the review, I've already done what I didn't want to do, where I'm trying to review the 2014 film and I'm already talking about the old film. It's just so much more interesting. But having said that, for this version of Robocop, I read that his movements are the original concept for the 87 film. He was supposed to have more fluid movements, and it was a product of the future, so they were depicting a very quick moving, very fluid. I think they called it a snake-like movement where it'd be efficient. But when the original suit arrived from Rob Bottin, it was completely enclosed. The undersuit, which was thick rubber with fiberglass pieces attached, it was completely enclosed, and the movement wasn't there. And they had to cut pieces out of it. You can even see in the behind the scenes footage and in the RoboDoc documentary that they had to remove a lot of pieces, and I think you can see under his armpits in certain shots that they had to cut all that out just so Peter Weller can move in it. And then they had to develop the more slow, purposeful robotic movement, which actually worked, even though it was a product of the then future. It's just much more forgiving, and it all worked. So I didn't mind that he was moving much more freer and more efficiently in this new film. And the scenes of him jumping, which looked like really bad visual effects. And again, I just think it's a shame that he knew straight away who he was. He had all his memories intact, and they showed him exactly what he was, you know, by separating all of his limbs, and he was just, was he a brain and a face and lungs? They should have kept that more secret, and he was supposed to find out over time. Maybe if he thought he suffered mortal burns and damage all over his body, and this suit was just a suit. He was still intact inside, and he would only have it temporary. And then the revelation maybe that there's nothing left, and it's not a suit. He's actually a cyborg. I think that would have carried more weight. But he knew everything straight off. He knew he would never be a proper man, husband and father. I think that was a missed opportunity. That could have been the emotional heart of the film. So unfortunately we missed out on all that character study. And instead we're just wasting time with certain scenes like the training scenes, which seem to just go on for a little bit too long. Then they changed his suit colour to black. Just completely irrelevant. A lot of the violence is just really toned down, way below Robocop 3, which, if you remember, that was a PG film, but it still had blood squibs, and it still had some mild language, and there was death in it as well, and you see even less of that here. And Robocop's using some kind of electrical pulse gun. It's just not the same effect as a triple firing Auto 9. So for a score, I can only give it 1.5. This kind of works as a character study in that Murphy still remembers everything, and how he's coping with being a cyborg, and how he interacts now with his wife and child. But I just feel the whole thing could be better told if he wasn't Robocop, if he was just a man, and we could explore those aspects in a different way. But this film just seems like a cheap retelling that is nowhere near as good as the source material. and I'm a fan of those films. I reviewed them a short time ago on this channel, and I loved each of them. And another small comparison I can make is that they've gone with a non-American director whose body of work is pretty good, and you'd think that he would be perfect for this kind of material, similar to how Paul Verhoeven was absolutely perfect to bring that original story to the screen. But something was lost here, and I just think it's all a bit of a shame. So I don't think they're going to make a sequel to this, and it's probably a good thing as well. Okay, I'm going to thank you all for joining me for this little takedown of this remake. Join me again next time, like and subscribe and all that. It's great speaking to you. All the best and take care.